Dubbed the Little Blue Men, China's little-known maritime militia is the bad cop of the sea. They do the dirty work that China's Navy won't, helping China's military win a war without gunsmoke.
Something strange is happening off the coast of South America, and the countries closest to it can't afford to say it out loud. Hundreds of ships, moving in patterns that fishing boats don't move in, carrying equipment that fishing boats don't need.
So, they're essentially civilian ships that do normal civilian stuff most of the time.
Staying at sea for months without ever entering a port. And every time a patrol vessel gets close, they adjust. Together. All at once. Scientists have noticed. Satellite analysts have noticed. So why does it keep getting called fishing? You're about to find out why. The military question no one wants to ask. For years, the conversation about Chinese vessels off the coast of South America has centered on fishing. Squid, tuna, shark. But inside defense circles in Buenos Aires, Santiago, and Washington, another theory keeps resurfacing, and it has nothing to do with seafood. It starts with positioning. Argentine naval authorities have repeatedly documented fleets sitting in tight, grid-like formations right along the 200 nautical mile boundary of its exclusive economic zone. Not drifting randomly, not scattered, structured, coordinated. Sometimes hundreds of vessels forming what analysts describe as a floating wall of steel stretching for miles. That kind of formation is efficient for industrial fishing, but it is also efficient for something else: surveillance mapping. Modern fishing vessels are not just nets and engines. Many carry advanced sonar capable of scanning deep underwater terrain. They map seafloor contours to locate squid concentrations. But that same bathymetric data is precisely what submarine commanders need to navigate silently through foreign waters. Detailed seabed mapping reduces acoustic detection risk. According to maritime security researchers, the South Atlantic has become strategically interesting because it hosts critical undersea fiber optic cables connecting South America to North America and Europe. Mapping seabeds near those routes could provide valuable strategic intelligence in the event of geopolitical tension. Then there's the maritime militia theory. In the South China Sea, China has openly used civilian fishing fleets as part of what analysts call a maritime militia, vessels that appear civilian but operate in coordination with state objectives. The Pentagon's annual China Military Power Report has repeatedly acknowledged this structure. The question many South American defense analysts quietly ask is simple: could elements of that model be extending outward? In 2023, Argentine authorities reported incidents where Chinese vessels maneuvered collectively when approached by patrol craft, altering course in unison. That level of synchronized movement requires communication discipline and centralized coordination. Fun fact: a single large squid vessel can process up to several hundred tons of catch per voyage. Now imagine that multiplied across hundreds of ships operating simultaneously just outside sovereign waters. Officially, they are there for fishing, and legally many remain just beyond the line. But when a fleet that large moves with that much precision, defense planners do not just see nets, they see potential leverage. And in geopolitics, potential is often everything. The floating supply empire no one is tracking. If the vessels hugging South America's maritime boundaries raise military questions, the ships sitting quietly behind them raise economic ones. And almost nobody talks about them. Because behind every visible fishing fleet is an invisible logistics machine. Satellite analysts from organizations like Global Fishing Watch and the Stimson Center have documented the presence of massive refrigerated cargo vessels, known as reefers, stationed 20 to 40 nautical miles beyond exclusive economic zones. These ships rarely fish. They wait. Here's why that matters. A single industrial squid vessel can remain at sea for 6 to 12 months without entering port. That sounds impossible until you understand transshipment. At night, smaller boats approach reefers with AIS systems switched off. Catch is transferred in bulk, sometimes hundreds of tons in a single exchange. In return, the fishing vessels receive fuel, food, spare parts, and crew rotations. This floating resupply system turns the fleet into a semi-permanent offshore colony. Fun fact: modern reefer ships can hold over 4,000 metric tons of frozen cargo, more than enough to carry the annual squid harvest of entire coastal communities. Once loaded, they sail to distant ports in Asia or sometimes to transshipment hubs where the seafood enters global supply chains labeled as high seas catch. And here's where the theory becomes more interesting. Control the resupply chain, and you control fleet endurance. Maritime analysts note that sustained offshore presence allows a nation not only to fish continuously, but to normalize physical occupation of a maritime space. When hundreds of vessels operate year-round in the same corridor, that area slowly becomes operationally familiar, mapped, tested, measured. Some South American policymakers quietly worry this creates a kind of gray zone presence. Not military, not civilian, something in between. Because endurance equals influence, and the longer a fleet can stay without touching port, the less leverage coastal states actually have. The space surveillance angle. Nobody expected. If fleets at sea weren't complicated enough, the story now stretches into space. Because the same vessels operating off South America's coast are increasingly being tracked not just by patrol boats, but by satellites designed to detect electronic fingerprints. And here's the twist. China is launching more of those satellites than almost anyone else. Over the last decade, China has deployed constellations capable of ocean observation, synthetic aperture radar imaging, and radio frequency detection. Companies like SpaceD and state-backed aerospace programs have developed satellites that can monitor maritime traffic regardless of cloud cover or darkness. Synthetic aperture radar can detect large metal objects on the ocean surface with precision measured in meters. Radio frequency satellites can hear radar emissions from ships even if AIS is turned off. Now here's the theory defense analysts whisper about. What if the fleet is not only being watched, but also feeding data upward? Modern industrial vessels are equipped with radar, sonar, satellite uplinks, and high-bandwidth communications. Data collected for navigation and fish tracking, ocean temperatures, current patterns, seabed topography, can theoretically be aggregated. In a world where oceanographic intelligence has military value, that information becomes strategic. Fun fact: detailed oceanographic mapping improves submarine stealth by predicting how sound waves travel underwater. Temperature layers and salinity gradients change acoustic behavior. Fishing vessels routinely gather this type of data to optimize catch zones. And there's another layer. China's Beidou satellite navigation system, an alternative to GPS, now provides global coverage. Vessels equipped with Beidou receivers operate independently of Western-controlled satellite systems. That means navigation, coordination, and encrypted messaging can occur within a closed ecosystem. No proof exists that these fleets are directly linked to military command. Officially, they are commercial, but analysts note something unusual. The level of technological integration on civilian fleets is unusually high. When you combine persistent offshore presence, advanced onboard sensors, dedicated resupply ships, and space-based observation networks, the result is something unprecedented. A civilian fleet operating with near real-time global awareness. The debt trap at sea. How control extends beyond the water. If the fleet itself raises strategic questions, the money behind it may be even more powerful. Because maintaining thousands of vessels thousands of miles from home is expensive. Fuel, crew wages, maintenance, refrigeration, satellite communications. It adds up to millions per voyage. So how does it remain profitable when operating so far from Chinese waters? Part of the answer lies in state subsidies. According to research from the Overseas Development Institute and the OECD, China provides billions of dollars annually in fishing subsidies, including fuel support and vessel construction financing. Some estimates suggest fuel subsidies alone can reduce operating costs by up to 30%. That makes distant water operations economically viable where they otherwise wouldn't be. But the more interesting layer is financial diplomacy. In recent years, China has expanded large-scale infrastructure lending across Latin America. Countries like Ecuador, Peru, and Argentina have received billions in loans tied to energy projects, mining operations, and port construction. For example, Ecuador has relied heavily on Chinese-backed financing for hydroelectric dams and oil prepayment agreements over the past decade. Here's the theory some policy analysts quietly raise. When a country becomes financially dependent on a major creditor, its willingness to escalate maritime disputes may soften. No official document states this outright. But diplomatic caution often follows economic exposure. Fun fact: Argentina's central bank has repeatedly relied on currency swap agreements with China valued in billions of dollars to stabilize reserves during economic crises. Those swap lines increase financial flexibility, but also deepen interdependence. So when hundreds of vessels operate just outside Argentine waters, enforcement becomes more complicated than simply dispatching patrol ships. It becomes a calculation. How far can a government push without risking trade retaliation? Loan renegotiation pressure? Infrastructure delays? This is where maritime presence blends with macroeconomics. The environmental domino effect no one can reverse. Beyond the geopolitics, beyond the satellites and subsidies, there is something far more difficult to measure: ecological tipping points. Marine scientists studying the Humboldt Current, one of the most productive marine ecosystems on Earth, have warned that industrial-scale squid extraction off Peru and Chile could trigger cascading biological shifts that last decades. The Humboldt system supports nearly 20% of the world's wild-caught fish supply. It functions like a conveyor belt of nutrients, pulling cold, oxygen-rich water from deep ocean layers to the surface. Jumbo flying squid, the primary target of many distant water fleets, are not just seafood. They are mid-level predators. They feed on smaller fish and are prey for sharks, tuna, sperm whales, and sea lions. Remove them at scale, and you disrupt multiple layers of the food web. Fun fact: a single large industrial squid vessel can deploy hundreds of powerful LED lamps at night, some exceeding 1,000 kilowatts of combined light output, to attract squid to the surface. From space, satellite imagery often shows these fleets glowing like floating cities in the dark Pacific. Here's where the concern deepens. Marine biologists from Chile have documented shifts in squid migration timing over the past decade. Some attribute it to warming waters linked to climate change. Others suggest that sustained industrial pressure may be forcing behavioral adaptation, meaning squid populations are moving earlier, deeper, or farther offshore. And when prey species move, predators follow. That creates instability for local fisheries already operating with smaller boats and limited range. There is also the carbon dimension. Large industrial trawlers burn enormous amounts of marine diesel. A study published in Nature estimated that global fishing fleets emit roughly 1% of worldwide CO2 emissions annually, comparable to some mid-sized countries. So the question becomes bigger than sovereignty. What happens when industrial fleets concentrate pressure on a single corridor year after year? Unlike a financial system, an ecosystem cannot be bailed out. Recovery timelines for depleted squid populations can stretch decades, especially when combined with ocean warming events like El Niño. The insurance and sanctions loophole that keeps it all moving. There's one layer most people never think about, and it may be the quiet engine that allows the entire system to function. Insurance. Every large commercial vessel operating internationally must carry protection and indemnity insurance, commonly called P&I coverage. Without it, ships cannot legally dock in most major ports. They cannot access financing. They cannot even secure fuel contracts in many cases. Now here's where it gets interesting. A significant portion of the world's maritime insurance market is dominated by a small group of providers based in Europe and the United Kingdom. In theory, vessels engaged in illegal, unreported, or unregulated fishing could have coverage revoked. If that happened at scale, large parts of the distant water fleet would struggle to operate globally. But in practice, enforcement is far more complicated. Many vessels operate under flags of convenience, registered in countries with limited oversight. Ownership structures are layered through shell companies. One entity owns the hull, another leases the equipment, another hires the crew. Liability becomes diffused. Fun fact: a single industrial fishing vessel can be owned by a holding company in one country, insured in another, flagged in a third, crewed by workers from Southeast Asia, and financed through a bank in yet another jurisdiction. That fragmentation makes accountability extremely difficult. There's also the sanctions question. In 2022, the United States and other governments began increasing scrutiny on forced labor in seafood supply chains. U.S. Customs has issued withhold release orders targeting specific fishing companies linked to labor abuses. When such orders are issued, seafood products can be blocked at ports. But here's the loophole. Transshipment at sea and reprocessing in third countries can obscure origin. Once frozen squid is unloaded, mixed, relabeled, or processed into meal, tracing its path becomes far harder. So even if one government tightens enforcement, the global system often absorbs the pressure. Insurance remains valid, financing flows, cargo moves, and as long as the paperwork appears compliant, even if the operations raise questions, the ships keep sailing, which means the real battlefield may not be at sea at all. It may be in boardrooms, compliance offices, and regulatory loopholes thousands of miles away from the glowing fleets off South America's coast. The undersea cable proximity that has analysts nervous. If fleets, satellites, subsidies, insurance, and environmental pressure weren't enough, there's one more layer that has quietly entered the conversation: undersea cables. More than 95% of global internet traffic travels through fiber optic cables laid across the ocean floor. South America is connected to North America, Europe, and increasingly Asia through a growing network of these submarine lines. Brazil alone hosts multiple major cable landing points linking to transatlantic routes. Chile and Peru connect into Pacific systems that bridge toward Asia. Here's the detail that makes security experts uneasy. Some of the most heavily trafficked fishing corridors overlap with cable pathways. Fishing vessels routinely drag long lines, nets, and gear across vast areas of seabed. Accidental cable damage is not rare. Globally, fishing activity accounts for a significant share of undersea cable faults each year. Repairs can take weeks and cost millions. Now add another variable. Modern ocean mapping sonars used for locating squid concentrations are capable of generating detailed seabed imagery. The same seabed contains fiber cables, typically buried only 1 to 3 meters beneath sediment in shallower waters, and often exposed entirely in deeper regions. There is no public evidence that distant water fleets are intentionally targeting cables, but analysts at several maritime security forums have pointed out something practical. Persistent presence near infrastructure provides familiarity. It creates knowledge of routes, depth variations, maintenance windows, and response times. Fun fact: when an undersea cable is damaged, specialized repair ships must sail to the fault location, deploy grappling hooks to retrieve the line from depths that can exceed 4,000 meters, splice it, and relay it, a process that can take days depending on weather and depth. In 2023, multiple countries increased monitoring of cable-adjacent maritime activity after incidents elsewhere in the world raised concerns about critical infrastructure vulnerability. The theory some strategists discuss quietly is not about sabotage today, it is about optionality tomorrow. The artificial intelligence command network behind the fleet. If the ships at sea look coordinated, there's a reason for that, and it may not just be radios and captains making calls. Over the past decade, China has heavily invested in artificial intelligence systems designed to optimize industrial fishing efficiency. Academic papers from Chinese maritime universities have openly discussed AI-driven route optimization models that analyze ocean temperature, chlorophyll concentration, current speed, lunar cycles, and historical catch data to predict where squid shoals are likely to surface. Fun fact: jumbo flying squid are highly sensitive to water temperature gradients of just 1 to 2 degrees Celsius. Satellite-monitored sea surface temperature maps can pinpoint where nutrient upwellings are strongest. Feed that into machine learning models and you don't just fish, you predict. Several Chinese tech firms now provide smart fleet management platforms capable of real-time vessel coordination. These systems integrate satellite imagery, weather models, and fuel efficiency algorithms. A fleet can be repositioned dynamically, not based on guesswork, but on predictive analytics. Here's where analysts get curious. When hundreds of vessels move in near-synchronized patterns along South America's maritime boundaries, it may not require a central commander issuing orders. It may be automated optimization at scale, software telling each vessel where to shift based on constantly updated oceanographic inputs. And that changes the equation, because once a fleet becomes data-driven, it becomes harder to outmaneuver. Traditional patrol strategies assume human decision-making. AI-based positioning adjusts faster than bureaucratic coordination on land. There's also another layer. China operates one of the world's most advanced Earth observation satellite networks. High-resolution imagery combined with oceanographic sensing feeds into centralized data systems. Some maritime researchers believe this creates a feedback loop. Satellites observe conditions, algorithms analyze patterns, vessels reposition, new data is generated, and the cycle tightens. Officially, these systems are commercial optimization tools, but in a strategic sense they demonstrate something larger: the ability to coordinate thousands of civilian assets using real-time predictive intelligence across half the planet. The quiet expansion into Antarctica's front yard. If the fleets clustering along South America's coast are already controversial, what's happening just a little farther south is even more unsettling, because the edge of the Southern Ocean, near Antarctica, has become the next frontier. Industrial squid fleets operating off Argentina and Chile are only a few hundred nautical miles from the waters governed by the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, CCMLR. That treaty system, established in 1982, regulates fishing in one of the planet's most fragile ecosystems. Why does that matter? Because Antarctic waters are not just remote, they are strategically priceless. They hold vast krill stocks, which are a foundational species in the Antarctic food web. Krill feed whales, seals, penguins, and fish. But krill are also in growing demand for aquaculture feed, pharmaceuticals, and omega-3 supplements. Fun fact: Antarctica contains an estimated 400 trillion tons of krill biomass in peak years. That's one of the largest single-species biomasses on Earth. China has steadily increased its Antarctic fishing presence over the past decade. While operating legally within CCMLR quotas, its fleet expansion has drawn attention. In 2022, China operated one of the largest krill fleets in Antarctic waters, using advanced mid-water trawling vessels capable of processing catch on board immediately. Here's the theory some analysts discuss quietly. Persistent industrial presence in waters bordering Antarctica could create long-term influence in future negotiations over resource access. The Antarctic Treaty currently prohibits mineral exploitation and limits militarization, but it is set for review in coming decades. And as climate change alters ice coverage and accessibility, previously unreachable areas may become navigable. Now imagine a nation that already has operational familiarity with those waters. Vessels trained for extreme conditions, logistics chains established, satellite coverage calibrated. From a distance, it's krill harvesting under strict quotas. Up close, it looks like positioning for a future few are openly discussing. Subscribe now and tap the next video on your screen.